I'm continuing to go through the 10 Resolute intentions. And tonight, the one that we are at is number 2. We still have a ways to go. It's called Harmonious. And harmonious is something which we deal with both outside of the Buddhist tradition. Harmonious has to do with countries, races, nations. But within humanistic Buddhism, I take harmonious to have to do with something very personal to all of us. And I have no solution for world problems. I just don't know how to talk about them. But tonight I will talk about not only harmonious, but also its opposite, estrangement. And I believe that estrangement, that it's one of the biggest issues which we face in our cultures. Being harmonious is, you would think, a no issue. Everybody wants to be harmonious, of course. And so I decided that it would be really incumbent on me, before preparing for this lecture, to look at the research on estrangements, because I worry sometimes that I have an opinion, but it may not be the only opinion. And I'm looking to see what is actually the case. So what is estrangement? Estrangement is having lost former closeness and affection. That is, someone that we've been close to, and the most important group in this are our families. Now, I know that you as monastics have left home, but I think you all agree that leaving home is not necessarily to leave all the problems behind. And that you are faced with teaching people. And one of the biggest issues that the average population around the world, according to the research, faces is that estrangement is not only from friends or acquaintances, but much more importantly, the estrangement is from family. First, the research on siblings, our brothers and sisters. 30% of people around the world report that they are separated, that they are estranged from their brothers and sisters. And this is caused by political differences. It's also caused by religious shunning. That is, if somebody becomes a member of another religion, then they're shunned. they're no longer considered part of the family. And I think all of us have, to some degree, faced both of these issues in our families. Also, another big issue for people is what we call end-of-life disputes. That is, for example, when our parents grow old and we all have to get together as children and decide what to do about them, it can cause a lot of trouble. We are in disagreement. We're not sure what to do. I've told you about my own mother. At the age of 92, she was in a nursing home, and they came to us and said she stopped eating and we will have to force feed her. And we knew that was not a good idea. So my sisters, in an act of great harmony and love, just the three of them decided to care for my mother as she fasted to death, which she did for almost 40 days without eating. We said we want to offer her food, but we will not make her. And it was hard for us to reach that as a decision. And I think to this day, a couple of the family members have never accepted that we did it. I understood their feelings. What you do with your parents at the end is really hard. And I faced this with my personal self. I'm almost at that end of life phase, and as you know, Foguanshan has, particularly here at Shilai Temple, they have taken me in. They have given me shelter, a beautiful apartment. They have given me food. And Chris, my helper, has volunteered to live with me. Not everybody gets this treatment. Not everybody has such a wonderful solution to the end of life. And I'm every day thankful that I have this special care. And I thank all of you in Foguanshan for your support in giving it to me. I had a friend come to visit me this week for the first time to come to my place. And he just looked around and he said, I'm never going to feel sorry for you again. This is a fantastic place you live in. How could you be so lucky? And I ask myself the same question very often. How can I be so fortunate? So with our brothers and sisters, end-of-life disputes don't always end as happily as mine is. And the other thing that the research points out, that one of the things that brothers and sisters have is old grudges. They just don't get resolved. And so the estrangement between siblings is because the old grudges are still active and being held onto. So I point this one out to you. The big issue in estrangement, one of them is with people and their siblings. And you're going to have to occasionally, and I think pretty often, find that people will come to you. The lay people will come. And one of the things they're going to talk to you about is their issues with their siblings. And it's painful. It's very painful to have these kinds of estrangements. The other is that people are estranged from parents. And I'm surprised at the number of people who are estranged from their parents. The research shows again, almost a third of the people around the world report that they are estranged from their parents. When they're asked, when did this estrangement take place? Most report that in their late 20s and early 30s, they grew up. They became adults. They became those who wanted to take care of themselves. They didn't want to have their parents taking charge of their lives any longer. Now, in the research, there is no question the ties to parents is much stronger than the tie to siblings. We can give up a brother or a sister a lot easier than we can give up mothers and fathers. So one of the things that the sutras tells us, and by the way, the words which I am quoting come from the sutra. One of the things that's found in the sutra is know the child that you have rather than the one you wish for. And I'm sure that there are going to come a lot of times where in some kind way or other, you're going to have to say to somebody, know the child that you have. It's very easy to wish for our children to be what we think we want, but they may not be that. We have to be willing to let them be who they are. And we have to know the child that you have rather than the one you wish for. But also, you're going to have to help parents. It is so hard. And as a parent, I'm saying this from experience. It is so hard to listen to our children tell about their perception of what went wrong in their relationship to us. It's really painful. We don't know how to talk about it. We don't know how to say it without making hurt. And how can you be true to yourself? How can you be strong, be independent even, be able to to talk about the things that went wrong and do it in ways that don't hurt and cause further estrangement? I think it's well worth conversations among all of you monastics as to how could this be done? What is a way to help people if they come with these issues? in the research where people were asked, what were the problems that you had with your mother? When people were asked, what caused you to be potentially estranged from your mother? And so they asked people, what was your wish list growing up of what you wanted your mother to be? And by a large percentage, they said, we wanted a mother who was more positive, who showed us unconditional love. We wanted a mother who was more respectful, less judgmental, and interestingly enough, one that I had not thought of, able to see when her behavior is hurtful. Now, I'm giving you at first some really hard things tonight. These are not things we want to think about. These are not things that immediately give joy, but they are real. They are very real for many people. And you, as counselors, as mentors, you have to face these things with people. So then what are the issues with fathers? Well, most children, by a large percentage in the research, wish that their fathers were more emotionally present. They felt their fathers were emotionally distant and were not really there. And then an interesting one, they often want a father to be stronger and to stand up to an offending spouse. They didn't want a father who just let the wife run all over him any more than they wanted a mother who let a husband do the same. But maybe the most important of all of these is they wanted a father who was more interested in them. And that one is something which parents need to be constantly reminded of. The children need to have those who are interested. Now, for you monastics, as I'm saying all of this, think a minute about Master Xing Yun. What are your memories of being with him? And I think he was always emotionally present. And he was interested in us. I was really stunned when I met him in 1988 for the first time. And he said to me, I've had my eye on you for quite a while. And I was so touched. He was interested in me. And that is something which I think all of you have felt from him. And you have to think that within the order, the other monastics, how many of them wish you were interested in them? And we need to keep these things in our minds. Now, how to be a parent. When therapists were asked, what's the best way to be a parent? Because I don't think you can find a single parent who doesn't say, I wish I had known more when I was raising my children. I had them young. I didn't even know what it was like to be a parent. Nobody ever gave me a lesson. Nobody ever taught me anything. I remember when my first child was born and we brought her home from the hospital. I had never been with an infant. I had the slightest idea what to do with her. I mean, it was like this strange object. So, what not to do? Nobody ever told me this. But these are things which I still am not sure I can do. Put yourself last. It's like flying in an airplane. The Buddhist text got there long before EVA learned to tell people when the oxygen mask falls, put it on yourself first and then on your children second. You must put yourself last in that sense. You mustn't put yourself last. If you put yourself last, what they worry about on the airline, of course, if the oxygen level is low, you want to stay conscious so you can help. And you must therefore not put yourself last. The other is not to give till it hurts. Not to get to the place, and this, all of you who are monastics, you must listen carefully to this, I think. You must not give to others till it feels like you're just being drained and it hurts. That's not how it works. We have to do it for ourselves first. And what we do for ourselves, then when we turn and do it for others, it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt because we will have done it for ourselves. And the last thing is something I do not know how to do. Worry, don't worry about your child all the time. And it's so easy to fall into that trap that we worry about our children. And maybe you realize this, some of you who are in positions of leadership, how much do you worry about your compatriots? And what good does it do you sometimes to do that kind of worrying? To worry that they won't be able to make it, that they won't do what they need to do. So I feel that the sutra tells us, don't put yourself last. Don't do it. And don't give till it hurts. Don't do it. And stop worrying. So now let's turn to the sutra. What I did is I went through the sutra and I said, all right, Dasabhumika, here are the problems. Big ones. I spelled them out. Estrangement from our parents, estrangement from our brothers and sisters. What do you have to say to me? What do you teach me as I read the sutra? And everything that it said about a bodhisattva seemed to me to be appropriate to all of the problems which I have just pointed out. It says a bodhisattva is free from being one who is annoyed or jealous. You know, they say if you put two 4-year-olds down to play, every 7 minutes they're going to fight over something. They're going to be jealous. And then they make up and keep on playing. And a few minutes later, once again, jealousy arises, annoyance, and they're fighting. As we grow older, Bodhisattva is one who is free of being annoyed or jealous. And then a big one, never holds on to old grievances. I had someone describe their old grievances as their museum. They feel their brain is like a museum. It's filled with all these old grievances. And when there's an argument or when there's some issue, out come the museum pieces, the old grievances. But the old grievances are of things past. Things have changed. That's what Buddhism teaches us. Things have changed dramatically. And if we're still holding on to the old grievances, then we're holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore. And we have to, Bodhisattva never holds on to these old grievances. And then the Bodhisattva abandons any thoughts of doing things which anger others. We call it pushing other people's buttons. Sometimes you know exactly what button to push. And when you get into a fight and you get heated up, before you know it, you're pushing somebody's buttons. And we need not to do that. We need not to be in a situation like that. And if people could learn this bodhisattva trait of abandoning thoughts which may give anger to others, to give up their buttons. We used to have a jar of buttons when I was growing up, and I loved to play with them. And I kind of was, when I was reading this, I thought of that jar of buttons. And I thought maybe I should take an empty jar and take some of my buttons, my old grievances, my old thoughts, and one by one put them in a jar and say, I'm finished with you. I'm finished with you. I don't need you anymore. I wonder if I could ever do that and have the jar filled and have my buttons in the jar rather than having them in my head. A bodhisattva is more respectful and one who gives and only uses pleasant words. This certainly reminds me of the master. He never used harsh words. When he spoke, he was always respectful of whoever was with him. Never in all the time that I saw him in operation, in working with the crowd, in speaking, I never felt that he was disrespectful. Whenever people asked him a question, sometimes he was almost painfully for them truthful, but yet he did it in such a way that It was gentle. I told you the story of the man who asked him, how can I make my son pay attention to me? Give me more respect and pay attention. The master said, well, one way to do it is to have money. And he wasn't being disrespectful. I felt like he was saying to that person, if all you want is just an outward show of attention from your children, then have money. You'll get it. Is that what you really want? I felt he was asking. Or do you want something more from them? Are you willing to give something more to them rather than just money? Are you willing to give this child that pays no attention to you? Are you willing to pay attention to them? Or were you willing to show them affection and love? If all you need is the outward expression, sure, you can have it. You can use money to buy it, but it's not satisfying. It's not satisfying. So a bodhisattva is more respectful. He's respect, and he gives and only uses pleasant words. I learned this from a colleague of mine. I realized she never sent me a message that didn't start off with encouragement, praise, and a good thought. And it was wonderful to get messages from her. I loved it because every time I got a message from her, it gave me a little boost. So you might think about that for all of us with our emails and our text messages. Make sure we use pleasant words. Make sure we're respectful. So a bodhisattva, says the sutra, has equal regard toward others and maintains harmonious relations with them, never becoming mutually estranged from them. In other words, the bodhisattva doesn't say, when he looks at all of everybody, I'm going to pick out my favorites. I'm going to show some people a lot of respect and interest because I like them. They make me feel good. They're going to get my attention. It's very hard to do this thing, which I have just read from you from the sutra, to have equal regard for everybody. Equal regard. It's really hard. And if you have this and maintain a harmonious relationship, then you never become mutually estranged from them. I can't think of how many times I heard Master Xing Yun use the word harmony. To be in harmony. To have affinity, he would often, or Malgoin would translate, affinity for others. That we have this equal regard and that we don't become estranged from some and not others. And we don't just have favorites. Of course, there are people that are our closer friends. But if we can treat everybody as a friend in the way in which Master Xing did with all the people he met, I never felt that he met somebody where he pushed them away. He invited them in. A bodhisattva is always truthful. And you could say, well, that's no biggie. Of course you should be truthful. It's one of the five things that you promise, that you take a vow not to tell what's not to tell a lie, to be truthful. But you know, it's so hard to be completely truthful. It's so hard every day, every question that comes toward you, to be completely truthful, never adding just a little bit to make it even better than it is or worse than it is. I think that if you can feel that you go through a whole day being totally truthful all day long, that's a red letter day. That's a red letter day. It's so easy when somebody says, um, is this bothering you? Oh, no, no, no. But it is. You're not being truthful. How do you be truthful and not be hurtful? How can you be truthful? And because you're truthful, you become a refuge. We say, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So how can I take refuge? A bodhisattva is a refuge. And he's a refuge because, number one, that last line, he brings about the end of suffering. How does he do that? How does a bodhisattva make us suffer less? It's through truth. The Dharma is teaching things the way they are. That's truthful. To say the way things really are, that's truthful. Can I be truthful in everything I say? And can I learn how to do it in such a way that it still leaves me as a refuge? Now, a bodhisattva in teaching, a bodhisattva teaches and is in accord with whoever comes to draw close to him or her, adapting to their capacities in an effort to help them. When somebody approaches us, somebody draws near to us, are we ready to do the teaching in accord with who they are and what they need and what their situation is? Are we willing to try to understand what their capacity is so that we'd only speak to something which they can actually do? Now, this isn't to say that some people are dumber than others. Certainly, we're not all as smart as the smartest people we know. I have a friend who's so much smarter intellectually than I am. I just look and wonder sometimes at how smart he is. And I know that whatever I say to him uh, has as much as possible to be in accord with what he is. I worry about teaching this class because all of you are so advanced. What is it I can say to you that will make sense in terms of your capacity? You have the capacities that are, I'm sure, beyond what one would find with an open mic audience in a totally non-Buddhist environment. You have the ability. So how can I teach you? How can I reach out to you? That's why I love to hear your questions. And your questions grow ever harder to answer. And that really pleases me, scares me, and pleases me at the same time. You are developing, you are constantly growing. And you're not going to be satisfied with just the same old material. So I told you when I was teaching that I finally burned all my class notes, put them in the incinerator. And the same thing has to happen to us as we grow and develop, and as the people around us do. The people that I'm working with today, your issues and who you are so different than the first audiences I taught. When I think back to my years of teaching, the people that I taught were absolute beginners. They knew nothing about Buddhism when they came into my classes. And even if they had grown up in a Buddhist home, they would often say, I'm taking this course because I don't understand why my grandmother burns incense. I don't know what she's doing. And what is that she chants? I realized that I had to teach them their roots. I had to teach them, if possible, what their grandmother was all about. So all of you face this in your teaching all the time too. You know what I'm talking about. How do you determine when somebody comes to you? How do you determine when you give a lecture to a group of young people? Here at Chilai Temple, there's a constant lecturing program for various groups. And sometimes they ask me to come and speak to a group. And when I go, I have to take some time, if they have can let me, to ask this people in the audience, who are you? Why are you here? What do you know? What do you want to know? And it's so important to try to get that before we start lecturing people. So I think when you have events, sometimes having people fill out something ahead of time. What is it I expect of this class? What is it I expect of this retreat? What am I hoping for? so that those who draw close, those who sign up for the retreat, you want to be able to make it as close as possible to their capabilities and help them. Now, a bodhisattva in circumstances involving people engaged in disputes who have become estranged always favors harmoniousness. That's very hard. Because if you get involved as a third party, which is the worst place to be, the third party in a dispute, two people are disputing and they come to you to make the decision which one of us is right, which one of us is the one who should be followed. Then we have to, says the sutra, think of how to favor harmoniousness in what we recommend to them. So it's not just making a decision about who's right, who's the best, which one gets our vote, but how can we do it in such a way that harmoniousness results? Well, if you need a model, you have it with Master Xingyun. That's exactly what he did, in my view. Whenever he seemed to run up against a big battle, he wouldn't choose sides. People wanted him to, and he wouldn't. He just wouldn't. He favored harmoniousness. So a bodhisattva, the sutra says, adapts to the differences in their minds, adapts to the differences in their faculties, adapts to the differences in their predilections, their tendencies. And after this adaptation, teaches the Dharma for their sakes. When you teach, as I say to people often, you're not teaching Dharma, you should teach people. And when you teach people, how do you teach them? As much as possible, you teach by trying to understand that you're going to have a big range of differences. And you must be able, as much as possible, to adapt to the differences in minds, in faculties, in predilections, and to teach things the way they are with this fully in mind. When you look at a child, children come to us and ask to be taught. And we know that we need to, if we're going to help a child, we have to try to meet them on the level that they are on. And so there are times when you have to go down and say, it's a contact with teddy bears. You're realizing that the child loves that teddy bear. And that's one way to start having contact with the child, is to meet them with their interests. And you don't try to make a child think a certain way. I, the other day, was with friends who brought a child, and the child was very worried about me and was shy. And the mother kept trying to make the child be friendly to me. And I kept saying to her, no, no, please, let her find me. Let her find me. Don't force her to take me. Let her find me. And a child will always find you. If you stay long enough, they'll find you. They can't help themselves. They're interested in everything. And then they come to you out of interest. Then you can play with the child in a meaningful fashion. But you never force. You never force a child. So a bodhisattva, very similar to what we already saw. A bodhisattva, when teaching those who are having a fight, when teaching those who make a big difference between themselves and others, I'm special, they're not. They make a very great distinction. Tries to bring about the conditions where not that you show great kindness to them, but what you want to do is to help lead them to express great kindness. You don't want to just have them think intellectually about kindness. You want them to live it. And how do you live great kindness? How can you help people live with kindness? And the only way that I know is that if I can show kindness to myself, can I forgive myself for my problems, for all the things that I did in the past that I wish I hadn't done? Can I forgive myself for any times when I've been untruthful? Can I forgive myself for the times when I have been unable to be interested and deal with the person with kindness? Not everybody is easy to like. We know that. Not everybody is. I have a person that tests me on this all the time. And he is not able to know his own self. He doesn't know his boundaries. He doesn't know what's appropriate. And he does inappropriate things and deals with me in ways that just, I have to admit, annoy me and make me unhappy. And I finally decided that I'm glad I have him in my life. I'm glad that I have somebody who really forces me to look at how do I treat people that I don't feel comfortable with. I need to practice. And he provides me with all kinds of wonderful material for practicing, because he can find a button that isn't in the jar but still in my heart, and he pushes it, and I find myself rearing back and distancing myself and being cool and withdrawn. Is there another way? I'm still trying. I'm still trying with him. And he's still giving me plenty of room for practice. And I thank him for it. One of the things that I have found so important to think about is when Master Xing Yun said, compassion is truth in its purest form. I mean, that is an insightful statement that goes beyond anything that I had ever been able to imagine about compassion. That it's truth. Compassion, when I feel this compassion that comes out of me toward another person, the compassion that I have has to be lived. It has to be true. I can't fake compassion. When I worked with still visiting in prisons, I knew that I could never, ever get away with telling the prisoners something which I didn't believe. They were so sensitive, far more sensitive than the ordinary audience. They would pick me up in a minute. And I think I've told you the story about the one who I was bragging about practicing patience in the LA freeway, and he asked me, but do you at the same time have compassion that everybody around you is in the same situation? Or do you just sit there in your car and think about yourself? And he was right. I sat there in the car and thought about myself. Compassion is truth in its purest form. That if I can say, as I try to in the LA freeways, even to this day, everybody here wishes they could go faster, wishes they didn't have to stop and go, wishes they could get home sooner, wishes they won't be late. Of course they do. They're all around me. I have brothers and sisters filling the LA freeways. We're all there together. And those moments when I can feel that are so wonderful. They are so wonderful to feel I am surrounded by brothers and sisters. In truth, we can find our way. And compassion is truth. But its special truth is truth in its purest form. Thank you all. Thank you.